In the last video, we explored why some of history's greatest minds rejected democracy. Plato watched Athens execute Socrates and concluded that the masses could not be trusted. Hegel argued that individuals exist only to serve the state, and Nietzsche warned that democracy breeds mediocrity. And honestly, they made some pretty compelling points about the dangers of mob rule and the value of expertise. But there is one crucial detail that they all left out. Every alternative they proposed ended in catastrophe. The 20th century gave us a lot of examples of what happens when philosopher kings turn into tyrants, or when states claim absolute authority. So today, we are exploring the other side. The philosophers who defended democracy despite its flaws, because something is more important than governance: human dignity and freedom. So let's start with John Stuart Mill, writing in 1859. Mill had read all of the critiques. He knew about Plato's ship of state. He studied the French Revolution's descent into terror, and he understood the risks of majority rule better than almost anyone. And yet, he became democracy's most powerful defender. Now, Mill did not argue that the masses were wise. On the contrary, the majority of philosophers believe that the masses are inherently unwise. However, he still defended democracy because he understood something the anti-democratic philosophers missed. The question should not be whether people always make good decisions, but instead, who gets to decide what counts as a good decision. In On Liberty, Mill introduced what philosophers now call the harm principle. He wrote, "The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others." And this was a very radical idea at the time. Mill is saying that even if you're making terrible decisions that ruin your life, and every expert in the world thinks that you're wrong, nobody has the right to stop you unless you're actually harming somebody else. Plato's philosopher kings could theoretically force you to live according to their vision of a good life. Hegel's state could claim your life whenever it decided. But Mill says no, that your life belongs to you. Your mistakes are yours to make, and that your growth, your journey, and your choices are fundamentally yours. But Mill wasn't naive. Of course, he recognized what he called the tyranny of the majority. He knew that even in a democracy, the majority could still oppress minorities just as effectively as any king. And that's actually where he agreed with the critics. Democracy sounds good, but it can absolutely become tyrannical if the proper safeguards are not put in place.
Civil rights activists sought to rectify this injustice through mass protest across the southern United States. Protests included the Montgomery bus boycott, the Greensboro sit-in, and the Freedom Rides, all of which received intense backlash from many white Americans. Protesters were threatened, fired, arrested, and assaulted.
So, according to him, how do we protect the most vulnerable and the minorities? Well, not by taking power away from the people. Instead, by protecting individual liberty so zealously that even majorities can't violate it. You build in constitutional protections, you separate powers, you enshrine rights that cannot be voted away. You create a culture that values individuality and dissent. Mill argued that the measure of a healthy society is how much room it gives for people to be different. He wrote, "In this age, the mere example of nonconformity, the mere refusal to bend the knee to custom, is itself a service. Eccentricity has always abounded when and where strength of character has abounded. This is the complete opposite of Hegel's vision, where individuals dissolve into the collective, or Nietzsche's fear of everyone becoming the same. Mill is arguing that diversity is a foundational feature of democracy, not a failing structure. The friction between different ideas, lifestyles, and different visions of the good life is what makes us better. Now, let's switch and talk about Alexis de Tocqueville, who came to America in 1831 to study its prisons, but actually ended up studying its democracy. Democracy in America, at the time, was not producing the chaos and incompetence that the European intellects predicted it would. Tocqueville said that American democracy worked not because Americans were smarter or more virtuous than Europeans, but because of how they organized their civic life. Americans formed associations, voluntary groups, clubs, civic organizations, and religious congregations. They practiced democracy at literally every level. And what Tocqueville understood that Plato missed is that democracy itself is a form of education, not simply a way of governance. Because, no, most of us have no idea how to govern a society. But when you participate in local government and serve on juries, when you debate in town halls, you learn. You develop judgment and you practice compromise. You are able to see other perspectives. Tocqueville wrote, "I do not know whether a jury is useful to the parties involved, but I am sure that it is very good for those who have to decide the case." The jury system is about creating citizens who understand how to weigh evidence, listen to arguments, and make collective decisions. And this is where the anti-democratic philosophers actually get it backwards. They assume people are either naturally wise or naturally foolish, and that you can't change that. But Tocqueville saw that democratic participation actually makes people wiser. Not perfectly wise or expert wise, but competent enough to govern themselves with dignity. But he wasn't blind to democracy's dangers. He did worry about the tyranny of the majority just like Mill did. He saw how democratic societies could crush individuality through social pressure. But his solution was to make it better by strengthening civil society and protecting minority rights. And crucially, to maintain a vibrant culture of association. Now, the anti-democratic philosophers would point out a bit of a problem here. All of this talk about individual liberty and democratic participation sounds great. But what are the results? What about actually running a country? Don't we need experts who know what they're doing? And the answer is, of course. And democracies have a lot of experts. The difference is that in a democracy, experts serve the people rather than ruling them. Scientists and economists and specialists inform the society, but the final decision rests with the elected representatives who answer to voters. And even then, you as an individual still have a right to dissent. Whether or not your dissent is correct, you still maintain some sense of power over yourself. And after years of democratic societies, there is substantial evidence that democracies actually govern better than autocracies. The democratic peace theory, first articulated by Immanuel Kant and studied extensively by modern scholars, shows that democracies almost never go to war with each other. But democratic citizens aren't more peaceful by nature. Instead, democratic institutions create accountability and transparency that make war between democracies nearly impossible. In just a few minutes, we'll discuss more modern events, but stick with me for now. Since 1816, there have been virtually no clear cases of established democracies fighting wars against each other. Britain and France fought each other for literally centuries, and then they became stable democracies and suddenly they're allies. Germany was the aggressor in 2 world wars, and after World War II, it became a democracy, and now it's a cornerstone of European peace. Democratic institutions create checks and balances that prevent anybody from making a rash decision. Leaders cannot just declare war on a whim. They have to convince legislators and face public scrutiny. They have to answer to voters who might die in that war. And research shows that democracies tend to be more prosperous. They invest more in education, healthcare, and innovation. They adapt better to changing circumstances. And none of this is because democratic voters are smarter than autocratic subjects. It's because democratic systems create incentives that align government behavior with citizen welfare. Mill recognized this. In his work on political economy, he argued that free societies with open markets create something that autocracies cannot: genuine partnership between nations. He wrote that commerce first taught nations to see with goodwill the wealth and prosperity of one another. In an autocracy, wealth belongs to the ruler. If another country gets wealthy, then that's a threat to their power. But in a democracy with free markets, your prosperity benefits me because we trade. Your innovation gives me better products, and your success creates opportunities for my business. We become partners rather than rivals. And this is sometimes called the capitalist peace theory or the liberty peace theory. Democracies with free markets actively benefit from each other's success. The incentive structure completely changes. But here's where we need to address Nietzsche's critique head on. He warned that democracy would produce mediocrity, that it would level everyone down to the lowest common denominator, and we would end up with a society of comfortable sheep who had given up on greatness. And you know what? Sometimes that critique stings, because we can quite literally see elements of it all around us. The demand for safety over adventure and the preference for comfort over challenge. But Nietzsche missed something very crucial. Democracy does not require mediocrity. It actually permits excellence while preventing tyranny. In a democracy, you are free to pursue greatness. You're free to take risks, to innovate, to challenge conventions, and build something extraordinary for the world. And yes, you are free to be mediocre, but you don't have to be. And Mill understood this perfectly. He championed what he called experiments in living. The idea that in a free society, different people should try different ways of life. Some will produce wealth and pursue art or knowledge, and even some others will pursue simple contentment in life. And the diversity of these experiments makes society richer. The truly mediocre society is actually one where people have no choice at all, where philosopher kings or state bureaucrats or military leaders decide what counts as a worthy life, and everyone else has to conform to it. Think about the societies built on anti-democratic principles. Plato's Republic was never built, and we've had plenty of attempts at rule by the wise. The Soviet Union claimed to be governed by scientific socialism, with experts planning the economy and society. And how did that work out? Millions dead, economic stagnation, cultural repression, and eventual collapse. Nazi Germany claimed to represent the highest expression of the German spirit, with the state as the ultimate expression of the people's will. And it ended in genocide and total war. Now, these weren't failures because the wrong people were in charge. They were failures because the system itself was wrong. When you concentrate power in the hands of one or just a few, even brilliant, well-intentioned, you create the conditions for catastrophe. But the deepest defense of democracy comes from its stance on human dignity. The anti-democratic philosophers all made the same mistake. They treated most people as a means to an end and tools to be used by the wise, the state, or history itself. Democracy starts from a radically different premise. Every person has inherent worth, not because they're smart or productive or virtuous, but simply because they're human. And if every person has worth, then every person deserves a say in the decisions that affect their life. Democracy essentially says you're an adult. You have the right to make your own choices and the responsibility to learn from them. You have the dignity of self-governance, even when you govern yourself imperfectly. But we need to be honest. Democracy is messy, and voters make a lot of mistakes. Demagogues do get elected, and majorities do sometimes oppress the minority. Short-term thinking does sometimes win over long-term planning. So, the critics weren't wrong about these problems. But the solution to democracy's flaws is not less democracy. It's better democracy, a stronger constitutional protection for individual rights, more robust civil society, and better civic education. It's more transparency and accountability, and protecting the spaces where people can dissent, experiment, and be different. So, if all of this is true, if democracy produces greatness, peace, and prosperity for the majority, what in our society has so starkly changed? We used to have these things. And while there has always been some sort of inequality of outcome, today, it seems that more and more people are fighting against the ideals of democracy. The core practice that Tocqueville witnessed that influenced his approval of democracy was citizen participation. We used to participate in civil discourse, go to town halls, and vote for the right people. But there is this idea that is infecting our democratic societies, that your voice does not count. Our vote is trash. Politics have become a game. We have become so separated from each other and so individualistic that we are sliding more and more into the Nietzschean picture of democracy. The more isolated we become, the harder it is for democracy to function. But make no mistake, it is not democracy as a structure that's failing. Mill and Tocqueville understood something that we don't get today. They didn't defend democracy as perfect, but as perfectible, as a system that, unlike autocracy, contains within itself the mechanisms for self-correction. When democracies make mistakes, citizens can organize, protest, vote, and change course. When autocracies make mistakes, you're stuck with them until the whole system collapses. So, yes, voters can choose badly, but autocratic systems sometimes produce monsters. And let me be clear about something. This defense of democracy is not claiming that all wisdom lies with the people, or even saying that the majority is always right. Not even that democracy produces the best outcomes in every situation. Instead, I'm saying something much simpler. That people have the right to govern themselves. That this right exists not because they govern well, but because they're human. And freedom is more valuable than efficiency. But in order for a democracy to work, the citizens must participate. The less participation we have, the worse off the system becomes. So, with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see y'all next time.